From PCs to smartphones to cloud servers that deliver social media and entertainment services, semiconductors power our digital lives. These digital chips, however, have taken a bit of a downfall recently. So why is this, and what can be done in this industrial AI revolution for the next decade and beyond? We're going to break it all down for you right here on UBS Trending. Hi, everybody, and welcome to UBS Trending. I'm Anthony Pastore. So glad you're with us today. And I am sitting with Kevin Dineen, my colleague from the Chief Investment Office, to talk about technology, but specifically semiconductors. So, Kevin, good to have you. I think, it's a really opportune time to talk about this because we look at cyclicality of everything in technology. But semiconductors have a really interesting story right now. So what's the latest going on there with these chips that essentially run our everyday lives?
Yeah, so semiconductors are integral to everything that we do, both personally and professionally. And it's a growth industry. It's grown roughly 2 times GDP over the past 5 or 10 years. But within that, there's some pretty significant cycles. So what we've seen over the course of the semiconductor industry is you tend to get these spurts of growth that last for about 3 years, and you see revenues go up by about 50, 55%. But then you do get some downturns, and the downturns can be pretty nasty. You see the industry retrench or sort of industry revenues contract. That typically lasts about 1.5 years or so. And you see sort of a peak to trough decline in revenues of something in the mid-teens. Mm-hmm. And right now, it looks like we're towards the bottom of a downturn right now.
So cyclically saying we're hitting the bottom-ish at this point.
Right.
So what's the expectation going forward then?
Yeah, so I think, ultimately, semis are nobody buys a chip in and of itself, right? Like, when's the last time you went to the store and you bought a semiconductor?
I wouldn't even know what to look for.
Right, exactly.
I just know it runs everything that I use digitally.
Exactly.
Right.
So semiconductors matter more so because of the products that they're in. So that's what drives the cycle, right? There's waves of demand that come on, and the overall sort of increasing penetration of silicon or semiconductors is what drives the overall growth rate, but you get these inventory contraction or inventory cycles that cause those contractions. So it's really about the end markets. And if you look at what's happened recently since we came out of COVID, look at the 3 biggest end markets: PCs, servers, and smartphones. Mm-hmm. PCs got down to about 250 million units. That compares to the COVID peak of about 350 million. Smartphones were about 16% off of the levels of 2021. But the smartphone base has continued to grow. And servers, which you mentioned, that power everything that we do, all of our social media experiences, increasingly all of our entertainment, servers are off about 11% from recent highs. Mm-hmm. So that demand has contracted, but it's cyclical, and we think those end markets are actually starting to recover.
It's interesting because when we talk about COVID and we all look back at 2020, even into 2021, as sort of a year that we couldn't compare to others. It was 100 years since we had a major pandemic globally, and we had nothing to compare it to in real modern times. Yeah. So is it possible to sit here and kind of say, well, listen, we're still looking at the regular cyclicality of semiconductors? Even looking at COVID, when everybody was home, you had to either buy a new computer or a digital device that we were trapped in our homes. We had nothing to work with for the most part.
I think you can still look at this cycle and put it in the context of historical cycles, right? So the math really doesn't change, or the drivers really don't change. You have sort of continued penetration growth, like more silicon and more things, but against that you have markets that tend to expand and contract on inventory cycles. So COVID was a unique, exceptional experience. Hopefully it's a 100-year flood that we don't get for another 100 years.
Hear, hear.
But I don't think there was anything particularly out of the ordinary when we look at it through the lens of a semiconductor cycle.
So talk about the importance of this, as especially for investors. Obviously anybody can go to to a store and buy a smartphone or a computer, and they're contributing to the GDP of a country where it was made, or the bottom line of any company that makes the product. But why is it important to investors, and specifically when you look at that smartphone and PC and server market? How does that actually play into the investment side?
Yeah, so look, semiconductors are a huge global industry. They account for, I think it's probably 15 to 20% of the U.S. technology sector. market cap. So it's a big industry that you want exposure to. And as I mentioned earlier, it is a growth industry. Now, it's cyclical growth, right? Because we walk through those numbers, you tend to get these periods of expansion followed by periods of contraction. The stocks tend to be anticipatory, so you have to be there before things bottom and hopefully, maybe not own as much towards cycle peaks. But I think it's an important part of a diversified technology portfolio,
right,
for sure.
Because like you said, it's really about the end markets, meaning it's not about the chip itself, it's about the device that it goes into, which maybe from the time that the chip is made to the time it ends up in the product and gets sold on the shelf, it could be a few months, maybe even up to a year or more.
Right, so it takes about 3 months from start to finish to manufacture a semiconductor. You've got to get that into a product, you've got to get that product into consumers' hands. That product, the semiconductor itself, there's a distribution channel. There's a whole sort of value chain here that tends to expand and contract like an accordion. And
right.
that's another part of the cycle dynamic.
Right, so it all makes sense when you think about the cyclicality of it all.
Exactly.
So, given that maybe there are fears on the horizon of a recession, that word keeps getting dropped here and there, that 2024 could lead to maybe a slight economic downturn. Is there any risk involved in this kind of investment case if we do see worse off economically in 2024?
Yeah, there is. And to be clear, we're targeting a fairly small group of semiconductors, we call it select semiconductors, that are exposed to end markets that we think are in recovery mode. Now, there's some end markets in the overall semiconductor world that have been like on fire, like AI, and those have been up and to the right. We think that's a different conversation to have. When we talk about the semiconductors that we favor right now, they are exposed to these end markets that we think are recovering. To the point of your question, if there's a recession, look, all bets are off, right? Because in a recession, you're going to see probably consumers and corporations and small businesses pull back on PC purchases. I think we'll all walk around with a cracked smartphone for another couple of months, right? So that could be a headwind to smartphone demand. Servers would probably slow down too. But I think this is a tactical opportunity. I don't think there's a recession on the horizon for, we don't see it for a few quarters at least.
Right.
And I think that sets up the opportunity. So, the way I describe it is, this is a tactical opportunity. You can think of yourself as being a renter of some of these stocks rather than a long-term owner.
That's great. And just last question for you, Kevin, thinking about more than the year ahead, if we look at the decade ahead, maybe 5 to 10 years, do you still see that cyclicality, or is it kind of too far down the road to really even get a sense of what that might be?
Yeah, no, I think this is a cyclical market. I don't think there's any way that we can get away from it. And, I mentioned AI, and right now AI is sort of the story of the day. But AI is not a new story. AI has been around for a long time, and even if you look at the prior AI cycle that was driven by things like machine learning and deep learning and neural networks, there were cycles of semiconductor demand even in that market, even as it was going sort of up and to the right. These are sort of CapEx intensive businesses. I buy a lot of capacity, I put that capacity in place, and I've got to grow my revenues into it. So even in a real secular growth story like AI, I think you're going to have cycles around semiconductor demand.
That's great. Kevin, thank you so much. Good rundown and nice job on the report. Good to see you.
Thanks.
Great. And thank you all for joining us. Obviously, there's a lot more information that you can find on our Insights website at ubs.com/views. Lots of information from Kevin and the rest of the Chief Investment Office here at UBS. And you can also follow us on social media. We're on all the channels, including Instagram. Follow at UBS Trending for a dedicated channel just to UBS Studios for content you're not going to find anywhere else. And as always, if you have any questions about your investment portfolio, make sure you are talking with your financial advisor. Until next time, I'm Anthony Pastore. Have a great day, everybody. And remember to keep your eyes on what's trending. We'll see you soon.